Don't get a shot of my pants because I ended up spending a little bit more money on the hat than I anticipated. I wasn't able to get a pair of matching pants, so just make sure you don't get my pants in the shot, okay? Hi, I'm a white guy. This is an acoustic guitar, and I'm gonna try to play a little ditty for y'all today. Well, you done me and you bet I felt it. I'm sorry, I forgot to take the freaking capo off, and it always throws me off. Can we restart? In my head, so my heart, cut. I gotta let my fingers rest. I'm exhausted. My fingers are hurting. When I reflect back on the early years of my college experience, there's definitely a very specific soundtrack that played pretty much the entire runtime, and that would be the sound of folk rock. Edward Sharpe and the Magnetic Zeros, the Avett Brothers, the Head and the Heart, the Lumineers, the Oh Hellos, y'all get the picture. Basically any group with a band name featuring a "the" and ending in lots of facial hair and a seemingly never-ending arsenal of cute little hats. My gosh, the hats. We traded in our emo hoodies and lip rings and started hitting up every local thrift shop we could find, hoping and praying there was a cheap vest available with just the right amount of wear and tear on it. And believe it or not, this photo was actually my Facebook profile picture going into my freshman year of college. Yeah. And while there was certainly a ton of folk artists coming out of the woodwork around this time, one group managed to drum up an insane amount of mainstream success: Mumford & Sons. Even if you hated the hipsters with stringed instruments playing aggressively and stomping their feet thing, chances are at least one of their massive singles found its way onto your iPod back then. Things kicked off for them in 2007 when alternative folk rock started getting popular in the west side of town, and Marcus Mumford decided it was time to call up the buddies and start jamming. After bouncing around for a bit and then recording and releasing an EP, they had built up a modest little following, and towards the end of 2008, they entered the studio to record their first full-length album. And, well, the rest is history. For all you newbies out there, the way Quarter the Four works is I take a look at a band's full discography, and most of the time I try to pick a band that has 4 full-length albums released, because, you know, the name of the show is Quarter the Four. Yeah. I give a brief summary and review of each album, and then at the end of the video, if you enjoy it, you subscribe, you get a free cookie. It's a win-win for everyone. I love this show. Most bands have a first album, but few have one that reached the level of popularity that Sign No More did between 2009 and 2011. This little sucker just would not stop climbing the charts until it finally worked its way up to the number 2 spot on the Billboard 200 a solid 2 years after its release. That's pretty impressive. The catchy melodies, profound theology, and earnest delivery had people lining up around the block to have a listen, and I'll be honest, the first time I heard it, I was really digging it. There were actually very few songs I would skip while listening to the album back then, and that was a bit of a rare thing for me before I was a seasoned music critic. While there's certainly an argument to be made about how unapologetically redundant they were at times when it came to certain tones, themes, and even a few of the melodies, Sign No More as a whole is a strong debut and does a good job of showing the fact that Mumford & Sons, while not necessarily the first folk band on the scene, were definitely one of the catchiest. A solid 8 out of 10 for me. Also, if y'all have ever seen a white guy with an acoustic guitar in the wild, there's a 95% chance he knows how to play half the songs from this album. Did someone say they were a fan of Mumford & Sons? No. Listen, I'm gonna level with y'all real quick. There is no other band that comes close to the genius of Mumford & Sons. The Lumineers are close, but seriously, the Mumford & Sons, they're just so good. Obviously, when the attention of the world falls on your shoulders, quite a bit of pressure mounts, and critics and audiences alike weren't really sure what to expect with their sophomore release. Would they expand their sound, or revisit the formula that brought them so much fame to begin with? After the massive single I Will Wait hit the airwaves in August of 2012, it became pretty clear that this new project would continue the steady skip down the folk alternative lane. But unlike Sign No More, some of the melodies on Babel felt a little lackluster, and the formula started to be quite apparent. Anticipating the slow then fast back and forth almost became comical at times, and while the final 4 tracks on the album, Hopeless Wanderer, Broken Crown, Below My Feet, and Not With Haste, are some of my personal favorite songs by the group, as a whole, the album just kind of felt like it was made up of a bunch of songs that were trying to capitalize on the magic of the first album. I think for me, Babel lands at a 6 out of 10. It's an okay album, but I'm just some guy on YouTube. Take my opinion with a grain of salt, I guess. After 2 full-length albums of Mumford & Sons solidifying their brand as a catchy, formulaic folk quartet, Marcus Mumford found a power outlet in the studio, and after listening to some Coldplay circa 2005, he had an idea. All right, brothers, listen to this idea. Gentle alternative rock. No, Winston, your banjo, this is who we are now. Naturally, everyone had mixed reactions when it came to this move, and unfortunately, I think some pretty decent music got lost in all the confusion. Tompkins Square Park, Believe, Monster, and even the title track are all pretty great and feature solid production work and even a more personal and emotional edge that some of their earlier stuff didn't necessarily display. Now, there isn't a hint of folk anywhere on Wilder Minds, and I think that's pretty gutsy considering the fact that their entire fan base was built around that. While the album isn't perfect, there's definitely quite a bit of filler, and the sound is nowhere near anything I would consider to be groundbreaking. When it's good, it's actually quite masterful, and I gotta say, I have a lot of respect for this project. It would have been so easy for them to crank out another carbon copy of what they had been doing up to this point, but they took a risk with this album, and I gotta say, at bare minimum, that deserves an optimistic head nod. All right, it's a 7 out of 10 for me. One more to go. So I've heard the argument before that Mumford & Sons are a boring band, and while I agree in their heyday they were maybe a little overhyped, I never quite understood this perspective because for me personally, when they were at their best, their music often had me reflecting on life, love, religion, and the complexity of existence. And I don't know about y'all, but considering how much music elicits no thought whatsoever, I didn't really feel like this argument was warranted until I listened to their most recent album, Delta, and as harsh as this sounds, it was kind of the first word that came to my mind. Very little of this record is actually appealing. The instrumentation is processed into nearly oblivion. The melodies lack any kind of emotional or catchy hook, and even Marcus Mumford's vocals just kind of feel uninspired, distant, and honestly a little awkward at times. I can't help but wonder what happened to the lyrical depth, the driving energy, and passion that used to pour from these guys on tracks like The Cave or Roll Away Your Stone. To paint things in a biblical metaphor, which Marcus Mumford often does, it almost feels like the group turned their back on an exciting opportunity and instead are wandering around in a musical desert of sorts. And considering the eerie soundscapes and rather bleak album art, maybe that's the whole point. But I don't know. Here's hoping this isn't a sign of what the next 40 years are going to be like for these guys. With all that said, however, there are a handful of things on the album that I actually enjoyed quite a bit, and that would be the lead single from the record, Guiding Light. I thought the melody was pretty solid. Also, the love song Forever has probably what I would consider to be the best chorus from the entire album, and the title track, and also the last song, Delta, has kind of an interesting flutter of different instruments and sounds, and the atmosphere that it creates is really quite interesting, and I enjoyed it. The album as a whole, however, yeah, I don't know, I just think they've done better. It's a 4 out of 10 for me. Harsh? Maybe, but that's just my opinion. What do y'all think? Drop me a line below and let me know. Thanks so much for watching this video, and I want to take a quick moment to thank all my subscribers. I've just reached 2,000, which is awesome. I'm super excited about that, and here's hoping I can get to 3,000 even faster than it took me to get to 2,000, but we'll see. Slow and steady wins the race, I guess.